The morning sun cast long shadows across the dusty military compound as Lieutenant Maria Reyes made her way to the water station. Her boots crunched softly on the gravel path, each step measured and purposeful despite the early hour. The desert air was still cool, a brief respite before the day's heat would become unbearable. She carried 4 empty water bottles, their plastic surfaces worn smooth from countless refills during her 3-year deployment. Maria had always been an early riser, even before joining the military. Growing up in a small Texas town, she would wake before dawn to help her father with farm chores. That discipline had served her well in the Army, where punctuality and preparation often meant the difference between mission success and failure. Today felt no different from any other morning routine, yet something in the air seemed charged with an unusual tension. The water station stood at the edge of the compound, a simple concrete structure that housed the purification system. It was one of the few modern conveniences in their forward operating base, a reminder of home in an otherwise harsh and unforgiving environment. Maria had made this walk countless times, but today she found herself taking in details she usually overlooked. The way the morning light hit the mountains in the distance, painting them in shades of gold and purple. The sound of generators humming in the background, providing power to essential equipment throughout the base. As she reached the station, Maria noticed Sergeant Johnson already there, filling his own bottles. He was a seasoned veteran, 20 years in the service, with graying temples and eyes that had seen too much. Despite his serious demeanor, he had always been kind to her, offering guidance when she needed it most. They exchanged a brief nod, the kind of silent communication that develops between soldiers who trust each other completely. The water flowed steadily into the first bottle, the sound rhythmic and soothing. Maria found herself thinking about her team, scattered across different parts of the compound, each preparing for another day of patrols and training exercises. There was Corporal Martinez, barely 21 but already showing promise as a natural leader. Private Chun, quiet and thoughtful, who could fix almost anything with basic tools and determination. Specialist Thompson, the joker of the group, whose humor kept morale high during the darkest moments. Each member of her team had their own story, their own reasons for being here. Some were career soldiers like herself, driven by a sense of duty and purpose. Others were young recruits fresh out of training, still adjusting to life far from home. But they had all become family, bound together by shared experiences and mutual dependence that only those who had served could truly understand. The second bottle filled quickly, and Maria moved to the third. She thought about the letter she had received from her mother yesterday, full of news from home that seemed both familiar and distant. Her younger brother had started college, choosing to study engineering instead of following her path into the military. Her parents worried about her, she knew, though they tried to hide it in their weekly phone calls. They spoke of everyday things, weather, neighborhood gossip, changes to the local diner where she used to work during high school. Sometimes Maria wondered what her life would have been like if she had chosen differently. She could have stayed in Texas, maybe become a teacher like she had once planned, married her high school sweetheart, raised children in the same small town where she grew up. But those thoughts never lasted long. She had found purpose here, responsibility for something larger than herself. The men and women under her command depended on her decisions, and that trust was both humbling and empowering. The fourth bottle was nearly full when she heard footsteps approaching. It was Private Williams, one of the newer additions to their unit. He was struggling with the adjustment to military life, having joined straight from a comfortable suburban background. Maria had been working with him, helping him understand that true strength came not from avoiding difficulty, but from facing it head-on. "Good morning, Lieutenant," Williams said, his voice still heavy with sleep. "Morning, Williams. Early start today," Maria replied, screwing the cap onto her final water bottle. "Couldn't sleep, ma'am. Still getting used to all of this." He gestured vaguely at their surroundings. Maria studied his face, recognizing the uncertainty she had once felt herself. "It takes time, but you're doing better than you think. I've seen your progress in training." Williams straightened slightly at the praise. "Thank you, ma'am. That means a lot coming from you." As they walked back toward the main compound together, Maria reflected on how much she had grown since arriving here. Leadership had not come naturally to her at first. She had been promoted based on technical skills and dedication, but managing people required different abilities altogether. Learning to balance firmness with compassion, authority with understanding, had been one of the greatest challenges of her career. The sun was climbing higher now, and other soldiers were beginning to emerge from their quarters. The daily rhythm of military life was starting, a carefully orchestrated routine that brought order to chaos. Breakfast would be served soon, followed by briefings, equipment checks, and whatever missions the day might bring. It was a structured existence that some found restrictive, but Maria appreciated the clarity it provided. She left Williams at the mess hall and continued to her own quarters to prepare for the morning briefing. Her small room was spartanly furnished, a narrow bed, a metal desk, a few personal photos, and the communications equipment that kept her connected to command. She set the water bottles on her desk and began reviewing the reports that had come in overnight. Intelligence suggested increased activity in the region, though nothing specific enough to change their operational status. Local contacts had reported unusual movements in nearby villages, but such reports were common and often proved to be false alarms. Still, Maria made notes to discuss enhanced security measures with her team leaders. The radio on her desk crackled occasionally with routine traffic. Patrols checking in, supply convoys reporting their positions, maintenance crews coordinating repairs. It was the constant background noise of military operations, so familiar that she barely noticed it anymore. But something about this morning felt different, though she could not quite identify what it was. As she finished her preparations and prepared to head to the briefing room, Maria took a moment to look at the photo of her family that sat beside her radio. Her parents stood proudly beside her at her graduation from officer training school, their faces beaming with pride and worry in equal measure. It reminded her why she was here, why the sacrifices were worthwhile. The morning briefing would begin in 10 minutes, and she wanted to arrive early to speak with the other team leaders about the intelligence reports. As she gathered her papers and prepared to leave, she had no way of knowing that this would be the last normal morning of their deployment, that everything was about to change in ways none of them could have imagined. The radio continued its gentle crackling as she moved toward the door, carrying the voices of soldiers across the compound going about their duties. In just a few minutes, that same radio would carry a message that would transform their routine day into something far more dangerous and urgent than any of them had experienced before. The briefing room buzzed with quiet conversation as team leaders gathered around the central table. Maps covered every surface, marked with colored pins indicating patrol routes, checkpoints, and areas of interest. Major Harrison stood at the front, his weathered face serious as he reviewed the morning's intelligence reports. At 45, he had seen action in 3 different theaters and commanded respect through competence rather than rank alone. Maria took her usual seat near the front, nodding to Captain Rodriguez and Lieutenant Davis as they settled beside her. The 3 of them had developed a strong working relationship over the months, each bringing different strengths to their collaborative efforts. Rodriguez was a master tactician, able to see patterns and opportunities that others missed. Davis had an intuitive understanding of local customs and languages that had proven invaluable in community relations. "All right, people, let's get started," Major Harrison began, his voice cutting through the ambient conversation. "Intelligence has flagged some unusual activity in Sectors 7 and 9. Nothing concrete yet, but enough to warrant increased vigilance." He pointed to specific areas on the large map mounted on the wall. Red circles marked the locations where local informants had reported strange movements and activities. Some were near key infrastructure points. Others seemed randomly distributed across the rural landscape surrounding their base. "The pattern doesn't match typical insurgent behavior," Harrison continued. "Usually we see focused activity around specific targets. This appears more scattered, almost like reconnaissance operations rather than preparation for direct action." Maria studied the map intently, noting the distances between marked locations and their relationship to major roads and communication lines. Her analytical mind, trained through years of military education and practical experience, began processing the information and looking for connections others might miss. Lieutenant Davis raised his hand. "Sir, I've been in contact with village leaders in those areas. They mentioned strangers asking questions about our patrol schedules and supply routes. It could be market research for legitimate businesses, but the timing is suspicious. Good point, Davis. What kind of questions specifically? Harrison asked. Mostly about when our convoys pass through, how often we patrol certain roads, whether we have predictable patterns. The kind of information that could be innocent curiosity or something more concerning. Captain Rodriguez leaned forward. If someone is gathering intelligence on our operations, they're being systematic about it. These locations would give them observation points covering most of our regular routes. The discussion continued for another 20 minutes, with each team leader contributing their perspective on the developing situation. Maria appreciated the collaborative approach Major Harrison fostered. Too many commanders made decisions in isolation, but Harrison understood that good intelligence came from multiple sources and viewpoints. As the formal briefing concluded, team leaders began filing out to prepare for their respective missions. Maria lingered, wanting to discuss the patrol assignments for her sector with Major Harrison. Her team would be responsible for the eastern approaches to the base, an area that included 2 of the flag locations. Lieutenant, I want your team to pay special attention to those observation points today, Harrison said, anticipating her question. Don't change your normal patrol pattern, but keep your eyes open for anything unusual. If someone is watching us, I want to know about it. Understood, sir. Should we consider altering our standard procedures? Not yet. If we change too much too quickly, we might spook whoever is gathering information before we learn what they're really after. But trust your instincts out there. Maria nodded and headed back to her quarters to collect her gear. The morning sun was now bright and hot, promising another scorching day in the desert. She could hear her team members preparing their equipment in the adjacent rooms, the familiar sounds of weapons being cleaned and checked, radios being tested, and supplies being inventoried. Corporal Martinez knocked on her doorframe. Lieutenant, the team is ready for final equipment check whenever you are. Give me 5 minutes, Corporal. Have everyone meet at the motor pool. Maria gathered her personal equipment, body armor, helmet, weapon, ammunition, first aid kit, and the various tools and devices that had become second nature to carry. Each item had its place, organized through repetition until the process was automatic. Muscle memory developed through countless training exercises and real-world operations. At the motor pool, her team had assembled around their assigned vehicle. The armored truck had seen better days, its olive drab paint chipped and faded from sun exposure and minor damage from roadside debris. But the engine was reliable, the armor was sound, and the communications equipment functioned perfectly. In their line of work, dependability mattered more than appearance. All right, people, listen up, Maria began as her team gathered in a semicircle. Intelligence suggests there might be someone watching our operations in the area. We're going to run our standard patrol route, but I want everyone extra alert today. Look for vehicles that don't belong, people who seem to be paying too much attention to us, anything that feels off. Specialist Thompson, as usual, tried to lighten the mood. So basically, another day in paradise, but with more paranoia? Something like that, Thompson, Maria replied with a slight smile. But paranoia keeps you alive out here. She reviewed their planned route, highlighting the specific areas where they needed to be especially observant. The patrol would take them through 3 villages, past 2 key bridges, and along a mountain road that provided excellent visibility across the entire valley. If someone was conducting surveillance, they would likely position themselves along that road. Private Chin raised his hand. Lieutenant, should we vary our timing today? If someone has been tracking our schedule, they might be expecting us at specific times. Good thinking, Chun. We'll add 15 minutes to our usual departure time and take a slightly longer route through the first village. Nothing dramatic, but enough to break any pattern they might have identified. The team loaded into their vehicle, each member taking their assigned position. Maria rode in the front passenger seat, which gave her the best view of the road ahead and allowed her to monitor radio communications. Corporal Martinez drove, his steady hands and quick reflexes proven through months of navigating challenging terrain under various conditions. As they left the base compound, Maria felt the familiar tension that came with every mission. No matter how routine a patrol might seem, the potential for danger was always present. Improvised explosive devices, sniper attacks, and ambushes were constant threats that required vigilance and preparation. The first part of their route took them through relatively open terrain, where visibility was good and potential threats could be spotted from a distance. Maria scanned the landscape through binoculars, looking for anything that seemed out of place. A vehicle parked where none should be, people in locations where they had no obvious business, equipment that didn't belong in a rural agricultural setting. Contact ahead, Martinez announced as they approached the first village. Looks like a market day. The village square was filled with people, vendors selling produce and goods, children playing between the stalls. It was a normal scene, one they had witnessed dozens of times before, but today Maria studied it more carefully. Were there more men of military age than usual? Did anyone seem to be paying unusual attention to their vehicle as it passed through? She keyed her radio. Base, this is Alpha Team. Beginning village transit. Everything appears normal, but continuing observation. Copy, Alpha Team. Proceed as planned. As they drove slowly through the crowded market area, Maria noticed an older man standing near a tea shop who seemed to be watching them intently. When he realized she had spotted him, he looked away quickly and disappeared into the crowd. It could have been innocent curiosity, but something about his behavior felt deliberate. Martinez, did you see the man by the tea shop? The one in the blue shirt? Yeah, he seemed pretty interested in us. Make a note of the location. If we see him again on our return route, we'll need to investigate. They continued through the village without incident, but Maria's unease was growing. Several people had seemed unusually interested in their patrol, and while that could be explained by normal curiosity, the combination felt significant when considered alongside the intelligence reports. The radio crackled with routine traffic from other units as they entered the second phase of their patrol. Supply convoys reported their positions, other patrol teams checked in from their assigned sectors, and the base operations center acknowledged each transmission. It was the steady rhythm of military communications that provided a sense of connection and security even in remote locations. As they climbed the mountain road that would give them the best overview of the valley, Maria continued scanning the terrain below. From this vantage point, she could see for miles in every direction, including the routes used by supply convoys and the approaches to their base. It was exactly the kind of observation point that would be valuable to anyone planning operations against them. That's when she noticed the glint of sunlight reflecting off something metallic in a cluster of rocks about half a mile away. She focused her binoculars on the location, trying to determine what had caused the reflection. After several minutes of careful observation, she spotted movement. Maria adjusted her binoculars, focusing intently on the rocky outcropping where she had spotted the movement. The afternoon sun created harsh shadows among the boulders, making it difficult to distinguish between natural rock formations and potential human presence. But there it was again, a subtle shift that seemed too deliberate to be caused by wind or wildlife. Martinez, stop the vehicle, she ordered quietly. Thompson, Chun, I need you to scan the ridge line to our east. About half a mile out, in those rocks below the communication tower. Her team immediately understood the seriousness in her voice. Each member took up observation positions, using their individual equipment to study different sections of the suspected area. Years of training and experience had taught them to trust their leader's instincts, even when they couldn't initially see what had caught her attention. I've got something, Corporal Martinez whispered after several minutes of careful observation. Definitely human movement, at least two individuals. They're using the rocks for concealment, but they're positioned perfectly to observe the main supply route. Maria felt her heart rate increase as the situation became clearer. This wasn't random reconnaissance or innocent curiosity. The position they had identified was strategically chosen to monitor military traffic while remaining hidden from casual observation. Professional surveillance required this level of planning and patience. Base, this is Alpha Team. She spoke into her radio, keeping her voice calm and professional despite the growing tension. We have possible surveillance activity in Sector 7, grid reference 245 to 631. Request guidance on how to proceed. The radio crackled with static for a moment before Major Harrison's voice came through clearly. Alpha Team, maintain observation but do not approach. We're dispatching Bravo Team to your location for support. While they waited for backup, Maria continued studying the suspicious position through her binoculars. She could now clearly see two figures moving among the rocks, and what appeared to be optical equipment that could be powerful cameras or spotting scopes. One person seemed to be recording observations in a notebook or electronic device, while the other maintained watch over the surrounding area. Private Chun, who had been monitoring radio frequencies, suddenly looked up with concern. "Lieutenant, I'm picking up unfamiliar transmissions on several bands. Short bursts, possibly coded communications. The signals are originating from multiple locations around the valley." This new information transformed Maria's understanding of the situation. What had begun as possible isolated surveillance was now clearly a coordinated intelligence-gathering operation involving multiple teams positioned throughout their operational area. The scope and organization suggested a level of planning that went far beyond casual reconnaissance. "Chun, can you triangulate any of those transmission sources?" "Working on it, ma'am. I've got at least 3 distinct signal origins, all positioned at points that would provide excellent observation of our patrol routes and base approaches." Specialist Thompson, who had been watching their rear approach through his scope, suddenly tensed. "Lieutenant, we've got a vehicle moving up the road behind us. White pickup truck, 2 occupants, moving slowly like they're conducting their own surveillance." Maria's mind raced through their options. They were potentially surrounded by hostile surveillance teams, with limited backup immediately available. Their vehicle offered some protection, but they were exposed on the mountain road with limited options for defensive positioning. The situation was escalating beyond anything their standard patrol procedures had prepared them for. "Martinez, start the engine, but keep us stationary for now. Thompson, maintain observation on that vehicle. Chun, keep monitoring those radio transmissions and try to establish contact with Bravo Team." She keyed her radio again. "Base, Alpha Team. Situation is expanding. We have multiple surveillance positions active and possible hostile approach from the south. Request immediate support and guidance." Major Harrison's response was immediate and urgent. "Alpha Team, Bravo, and Charlie teams are en route to your position. Estimate arrival in 12 minutes. Maintain defensive posture and prepare for possible contact." The 12 minutes that followed felt like hours. Maria's team maintained their observation positions while she coordinated with base operations to track the developing situation. Each radio transmission revealed new information about the scope of the surveillance operation they had uncovered. Bravo Team reported encountering roadblocks that hadn't been there during their morning patrol, suggesting that the hostile elements had been preparing for this operation throughout the day. Charlie Team found evidence of recent encampments in positions overlooking key infrastructure, indicating that the surveillance had been ongoing for several days or possibly weeks. "Lieutenant," Private Chin called out urgently, "I'm detecting radio jamming on our primary frequencies. Someone is trying to cut our communications with base." This escalation confirmed Maria's worst fears. Professional military or paramilitary forces didn't just jam communications for intelligence-gathering purposes. This was preparation for direct action, and her team was potentially the first target in a larger operation against their base. She switched to their emergency frequency and attempted to contact base operations. Static filled her earpiece, confirming that hostile forces were indeed interfering with their communications. They were now operating with limited support and uncertain backup arrival times. "Martinez, we need to move to a more defensible position. That cluster of buildings at the bottom of the slope will give us better cover and multiple exit routes." As their vehicle began moving down the mountain road, the situation deteriorated rapidly. The white pickup truck that Thompson had been monitoring accelerated toward their position, and additional vehicles emerged from concealed positions throughout the valley. What had been a surveillance operation was clearly transitioning to active pursuit. "Contact front," Martinez shouted as he spotted armed figures moving among the buildings they had been planning to use for cover. Their intended refuge had already been compromised by hostile forces who had anticipated their movement. Maria's training took over as she assessed their tactical situation. They were outnumbered, communications were compromised, and their planned escape routes were blocked. But they still had mobility, superior equipment, and the advantage of being part of a larger military force that would be responding to their situation. Chun switched to backup radio and attempt contact on any available frequency. Thompson, prepare for defensive fire if necessary. Martinez, reverse course, and head for the secondary road junction. The next few minutes were a blur of rapid decision-making and tactical maneuvering. Their vehicle raced along the mountain road while Maria coordinated defensive actions and attempted to re-establish communications with their base. The hostile forces seemed to have planned for multiple contingencies, but they had underestimated the training and resourcefulness of a professional military team. As they reached a position with better radio reception, Maria finally managed to establish contact with base operations. The relief in Major Harrison's voice was evident as he confirmed that multiple support teams were converging on their location. Alpha Team, we have air support en route, and ground teams approaching from 3 directions. Hold your position and await support. But even as backup arrived and the immediate threat diminished, Maria realized that this incident represented something much larger than a local security threat. The level of coordination and planning they had witnessed suggested an organized effort to gather intelligence about their operations and possibly to test their response capabilities. The afternoon sun was beginning to set as additional military vehicles arrived to secure the area and begin investigating the surveillance positions. Maria's team had been through their first real combat situation, and while they had performed well under pressure, she knew that this was likely just the beginning of increased hostile activity in their region. As she prepared her initial report for Major Harrison, Maria reflected on how quickly a routine patrol had transformed into a significant security incident. The military skills and teamwork that had seemed abstract during training exercises had proved invaluable when faced with real danger. But, more importantly, she realized that their enemy was more sophisticated and organized than intelligence reports had suggested. The radio that had carried routine morning communications was now crackling with urgent traffic as military units throughout the region responded to the new threat level. What had started as a simple water bottle refill at dawn had led to discoveries that would reshape their understanding of the security situation and their operational procedures for weeks to come. The emergency debriefing session took place in the base's Secure Communications Center, a reinforced concrete building that housed the most sensitive intelligence equipment and provided protection against electronic surveillance. Major Harrison had assembled every team leader, intelligence officer, and senior NCO for what would prove to be one of the most important tactical discussions of their deployment. Maria sat at the central table, her notes from the afternoon's events spread before her. The adrenaline from their encounter had faded, replaced by the methodical process of analyzing what they had discovered and planning their response. Around her, other team leaders shared similar reports of unusual activity in their assigned sectors, painting a picture of coordinated surveillance that extended far beyond what any single patrol had encountered. "The pattern is clear," began Captain Rodriguez, pointing to marked locations on the large tactical map. "Over the past week, we've documented at least 12 separate surveillance positions, all with clear sight lines to our key routes and facilities. This isn't random intelligence gathering. Someone has been conducting systematic reconnaissance of our entire operational area." Intelligence Officer Lieutenant Colonel Peterson, who had arrived that afternoon from regional headquarters, studied the accumulated reports with growing concern. A 25-year veteran with extensive experience in counterintelligence operations, she brought expertise that their forward operating base had previously lacked. "What you've uncovered suggests a preparation phase for a much larger operation," Peterson explained. "The level of detail and coordination indicates either a well-funded insurgent group or possible involvement by a foreign military organization. Either way, we're dealing with professionals." Major Harrison nodded grimly. "The question is whether this is preparation for direct action against our base or intelligence gathering for operations elsewhere in the region. Lieutenant Reyes, walk us through exactly what your team observed." Maria stood and approached the map, using a laser pointer to highlight the specific locations where they had encountered hostile surveillance. The first indication was unusual behavior in the village market. Several individuals seemed overly interested in our patrol timing and route. Then, we identified at least 2 observer positions with professional equipment and coordinated communications. She continued her briefing, describing the radio jamming attempts, the coordinated vehicle movements, and the apparent prepositioning of hostile forces along their planned escape routes. Each detail added to the picture of an operation that had been planned and executed with military precision. The most concerning aspect, Maria concluded, was how quickly the situation escalated from passive surveillance to active pursuit. These people were prepared to engage us directly rather than simply gathering information. That suggests they're confident enough in their capabilities to risk exposure for tactical advantage. Lieutenant Colonel Peterson asked several pointed questions about the equipment they had observed, the apparent training level of the hostile forces, and the sophistication of their communications jamming capabilities. Her queries revealed years of experience in analyzing enemy tactics and capabilities. Based on what you've described, I believe we're looking at a hybrid force combining local knowledge with external training and equipment, Peterson concluded. The surveillance techniques are professional grade, but the execution shows signs of adaptation to local conditions and limitations. The discussion continued for over 2 hours as team leaders shared observations and intelligence officers analyzed patterns. What emerged was a comprehensive picture of an enemy force that had been operating in their area for weeks, systematically gathering intelligence while remaining largely undetected until Maria's team had stumbled across their activities. The immediate question, Major Harrison stated, is whether we modify our operations to counter this surveillance or maintain current procedures to avoid alerting them that we've discovered their activities. It was a classic intelligence dilemma. Changing their patterns too quickly might prevent the enemy from gathering useful information, but it would also confirm that their surveillance had been detected. Maintaining current operations risked providing the enemy with the intelligence they were seeking, but might allow friendly forces to identify and neutralize the hostile network. Lieutenant Colonel Peterson had faced similar situations throughout her career. My recommendation is a middle approach. Make subtle modifications that appear to be normal operational variations while implementing enhanced security measures that aren't obvious to external observers. We want to protect our operations without compromising our ability to gather counterintelligence. The plan that emerged from their discussion was complex but achievable. Patrol routes would be modified gradually over several days, making it appear that changes were routine rather than responses to detected threats. Communications procedures would be enhanced with additional encryption and frequency changes that would complicate enemy interception efforts. Most importantly, new surveillance and counter-surveillance operations would be implemented to identify and track the hostile intelligence network. As the formal briefing concluded, Major Harrison asked Maria to remain behind for a private discussion. The events of the day had elevated her status within the command structure, demonstrating leadership and tactical awareness that exceeded her formal rank and experience level. Lieutenant, I want you to know that your actions today likely prevented a much more serious situation, Harrison began. If that surveillance network had completed their intelligence gathering undetected, we could have faced a coordinated attack with devastating consequences. Maria felt a mixture of pride and concern. Thank you, sir. But I'm worried about my team. This afternoon was intense, and some of them are still processing what happened. Private Williams especially seemed shaken by how quickly things escalated. That's exactly the kind of thinking that makes you a good leader, Harrison replied. Yes, the tactical response was excellent, but understanding the human impact on your people is equally important. I want you to spend time with each team member over the next few days, making sure they're processing this experience in a healthy way. The conversation revealed another dimension of military leadership that Maria was still learning to navigate. Technical competence and tactical skill were essential, but managing the psychological and emotional welfare of her team required different abilities altogether. The afternoon's events had been a crucible that tested all of these leadership dimensions simultaneously. As she left the briefing room, Maria found her team members gathered in the common area, engaged in the kind of post-mission discussion that helped soldiers process intense experiences. Thompson was telling stories to lighten the mood, while Chun and Martinez compared technical observations from their encounter. Williams sat slightly apart, still processing the day's events. How's everyone holding up? Maria asked as she joined the group. Better now that we're back safe, Martinez replied. But I keep thinking about how well organized those people were. This wasn't some random group causing trouble. That's what makes today important, Maria explained. We discovered something significant, and Now our intelligence people can work to understand and counter it. What we learned today will help protect not just our base, but other units throughout the region. She spent the next hour talking with each team member individually, listening to their concerns and helping them understand the broader significance of their experience. For some, like Martinez and Thompson, the day had been validation of their training and capabilities. For others, like Williams and Chun, it had been an introduction to the realities of combat that no training exercise could fully simulate. Later that evening, as Maria prepared her final written report, she reflected on the chain of events that had started with such a routine activity. Refilling water bottles at dawn had seemed like the most mundane possible way to begin a day, yet it had led to discoveries that would influence their operations for the remainder of their deployment. The radio on her desk continued its familiar background chatter, but now every transmission carried additional significance. Communication security protocols had been enhanced, frequencies had been changed, and new authentication procedures had been implemented. The enemy's attempt to intercept their communications had resulted in improvements that would serve them well in future operations. As she completed her report and prepared for sleep, Maria realized that the day's events had marked a turning point in her development as a military leader. She had successfully guided her team through a dangerous situation, made critical tactical decisions under pressure, and helped her soldiers process a traumatic experience. More importantly, she had contributed to uncovering a significant threat that could have had devastating consequences if left undetected. The morning sun that had seemed so peaceful as she filled her water bottles now felt like a lifetime ago. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and responsibilities, but tonight she could take satisfaction in knowing that her team had performed admirably when it mattered most. The radio that would soon carry the next day's operational traffic had witnessed the kind of military action that transforms routine soldiers into seasoned veterans and routine patrols into pivotal moments in a larger campaign.